So give me 1 second. Okay. So, yeah, like I said, policy systems and environmental change is the topic today. And this is kind of not exactly a follow-up, but it will build on the workshop that some of you I know attended back in the fall when we were starting to talk about root cause analysis and needs assessment around our mass in motion work. So we're kind of going to talk about some of the stuff we talked about in that session and build on the work we did around this idea of upstream change, which we're going to learn a lot more about. So I will pass it over to Cynthia and Allison if you would like to introduce yourselves and then get started.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us in this virtual world of Zoom today. And as Kristen mentioned, we're here to talk about policy systems and environmental change. Before we get started, we kind of wanted to build our roots together and get to know each other. I mean, you all have worked together and continue to work, but we're here as guests and would like to learn a little bit more about you. So we would love to learn more about your names, any pronouns, community that you represent, and what are your favorite songs or movie that you recently either listened to or seen? And I will leave it open for anyone to start it, and you can pass it on after. Who would like to start?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Favorite song or movie that you recently either heard the song or a movie that you've seen? Are you volunteering first? I'm not trying.
No, I'm not.
Okay, good. And, feel free to jump in, and then you pass it on. Oh, you're muted if you're speaking to us.
Sorry, I thought I unclicked it. I guess I didn't. I'm Jeanette, she, her. And it's not a movie, it was a series on Netflix, but it was Beef. Has anyone seen that? Oh my gosh, that was like so intense, like twist and turn, but then at the end, oh my God. It was good. And I live in Florence, Mass.
Thank you. Awesome. You want to pass it on to somebody else?
Sure. I'll pass it to Kia.
So, oh my God, I am so overwhelmed right now. My name is Kia, she, her pronouns. I just got back from a really intense trip in Mississippi, which was mind-blowing, just really mind-blowing. My favorite song that I heard recently is Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve. And I haven't seen a movie in a really long time. So I can't talk about that. But the song, my favorite song from the 90s, I did hear 2 days ago. And I pass it to, I got to pass it to somebody.
Yeah, anybody.
I'll pass it to Jeanette.
Well, Jeanette went, so it will be to somebody
I passed it to you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh my God. I'm not home yet. Technically, I mean, in my head, I'm not back yet. I think I'll do Jupong.
Hi, everybody. Jupong Lin. Guamiashi Jupong. Use she, her pronouns, although in Taiwanese, there's only one pronoun, E. I think my favorite music, I'm going to share this in the chat, is Taiwanese folk metal. Who knew? Really great video. And I've been watching Dead Ringers. I think I finished the last, this is the new version. It's two women, or twins. I mean, it's played by one actress, but it's really good. Kind of gory, but really interesting to see a film about reproduction, and it takes place at a women's birthing center. And that's it, right? Pass it to Clarissa.
Hello, my name is Clarissa, she, her pronouns. I live in Irving, Mass. And I just recently watched a movie called Dumplin', which is very Southern, very beauty pageant, but not. It was a very good movie. It's all the feels. Too many feels. Oh, is it? That's very cool. Based on a book somebody put in the comments. I'll have to look that up because now I'm curious. And I don't really listen to a whole lot of music, so I don't have anything to go in that direction. And I will pass it to Sue.
Thank you, Clarissa. Sue, she, her pronouns, West Hampton, Mass. I'm stumped for two reasons. I can't remember much these days. So I have no idea what films I watch. I watch crap on TV. No, it's not crap. What I do know, and it's not a song, it's Mendelssohn's fourth and fifth concerto, violin concerto, and I have it in my car and I play it round and round and round and round again. I could sing it for you almost. That's what I like. And I will pass it to Roz.
Thanks, Sue. My name is Roz Malkin. I live in Chesterfield in the Hill Towns, she, her. And I'm a big fan of the Turner Classic Movie Channel. So I like all of the black and white movies. And one that I had recorded and watched recently again for the umpteenth time is Random Harvest with Greer Garson and Ronald Coleman. It's just, if you like that kind of stuff, it's really, really fine. It's really good. They're both wonderful actors with these terrific voices, and it's one of those feel-good movies. So good stuff on a rainy day. And I will pass it to Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Sheridan from Cummington, Massachusetts. My pronouns are she and her. I've been watching The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon, and that's been a lot of fun. I'll pass it to Cynthia.
Thank you. I would say I can share quickly. The most recent movie I watched was with my daughter. She's 4. We went to see Super Mario Brothers. So I'm a big fan of that. So it's been very exciting to back in the 90s, remember it, and now and early on seeing it and having the new generation learn about that. I'll pass it to Giuliani. Let's see here.
Hello, I'm Juliani, she, her pronouns. Last movie I watched was Wakanda Forever. I was really looking forward to it, but wasn't able to watch it last year. So I really enjoy it. I love the action and woman power. So it was nice. Was there something else or that's it?
That was it. Thank you. You
That's
can
it.
pass it on to somebody else who hasn't gone.
I think it's only Joanny, right? That hasn't gone yet. Or
Yes.
Sí, su mami.
Yes, her mom. My pronouns are she, her. My name is Johanny. I'm from Amherst. I'm from the model market community. And the last movie, I don't know. I'm really watching soap operas. That is what I like the most because I see each episode. Like my daughters say, they are like series that every day they have a different chapter, new one. And I finished it. I finished it with before my mom left last Sunday. And we've seen almost every chapter during the day to have it completed. So It was cold in here, and our best activity, our hobby to do was to watch that soap opera, but we finished it and we enjoyed it.
Thank you. And then Rosanna.
Yo creo que falta Kristen.
Oh, Kristen, yeah.
I think we're missing Kristen.
I'll go and then I'll pass it to you, Rosanna. Well, I already introduced myself, but I use she or they pronouns, and I live in Northampton. And I'm also stumped about a movie. I guess I'll say a song I've been liking. I really like the band Big Thief, and they have a song called Spud Infinity that I really love, and they're going to be playing in Northampton in July. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'll pass it to Rosanna.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everybody. I'm Rosanna Salazar, and I am use she, her pronouns. And the last times I didn't see any movie or listen a song, but I could remember, except children music. And I could remember I like Police, and one of their song is Rose of the Desert. I like it. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison, would you like to share?
Sure. So my name is Allison Shifley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-facilitators here with Cynthia. So I actually live in Quincy on the east coast of Massachusetts. I also can't remember the last time I saw a movie or went to the movie theater. It's obviously before COVID, but can't remember what it was. But so I've been watching TV. So I've been watching the new season of Ted Lasso that's out. So I'm very excited for that.
Awesome. Thank you all. I hope this is nice and inspiring, not only to maybe have a playlist going or have some other ways to enjoy time to entertain yourselves. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for letting us get to know you a little bit more. I'm going to share my screen. We do have a presentation to go through. Are you all able to see this screen? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to put it on presenter mode.
Oh, I was just gonna say, just so I don't have to type it in the chat, Yohani, I'm gonna send you the slides in Spanish so that you can follow along with the Spanish slide deck if you want. I'll email it to you right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So again, today we're coming together to discuss a little bit more about policy, systems, and environmental change. This is our time together, a brief agenda of what is PSE change, really going into details and defining it more. I know Kristen mentioned the term upstream versus, and we're gonna go more into details in defining it and also discussing what is upstream versus downstream approaches. Some examples, we'll have group discussion assigned for sure, but throughout this whole presentation, we want this to be interactive, and we would like for you to, at any time ask questions or unmute yourself or put it in the chat with any clarification, and then we'll close our time together. And really the objectives of today, we want you to leave understanding what policy systems and environmental change looks like in your community. And then identifying key components of actionable and data-grounded PSE change strategies. So that's our goal for today. So first, I wanted to start with a PSE. We're going to use that acronym a lot, but PSE stands for Policy Systems and Environmental Change. But first, we wanted to define what those three words really mean in this context. So a policy improvement may include a law, regulation, procedure, administrative action, incentive, or voluntary practice of governments and other institutions. So these are policies that many, if thinking through a municipal level or government level, these are sort of the laws that they follow through to make things happen. Systems improvement include a change that impacts all elements, including social norms of an organization, institution, or system. So these could be ways that an organization now delivers training like this one. Now you'll be able to change your system and how you offer now interpretation, or within staff, you do other related things there. And it looks very different through that. And environmental improvements may include change of the physical, social, and economic environment. So those, as you can see here, usually are things that you usually see more, are a little more visual, and really impact all residents in community there.
Cynthia, I'll take over. Can you send the Spanish slides to Kristen?
Yes.
Awesome. So these are a few different examples of PSE change approach versus a programs approach. And programs approaches are what we see more often. And maybe you have a background in that a little bit more, right? I came from an actual program background, right? We would put on different events, and those are awesome. But what we're trying to do is to create more long-term change, more sustainable change than, for example, just hosting a community bike ride at one time. So you can see the difference here is like, instead of just the bike ride, how are we implementing like a complete streets policy, right? To make sure roads are actually designed to be safe. And so that's the difference. It doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't hold a bike ride, but we're trying to think bigger than that. And sometimes you have to do that programs approach first in order to generate some interest and generate some, some of those stakeholders to really buy into the changes that you're trying to make, right? So, a food example here is like programs approach is working with the corner store to become a designated healthy market. That's awesome, but we want to make that bigger. Instead of just working with one corner store, how are we doing this citywide? How are we doing this so that it stays as part of our town for years to come? Any questions or comments on this? No? Okay. I'll also note that, in some ways, PSE change really does depend on individuals, but it's about setting up that environment to make those changes, right? So it's kind of a both and. We need our individuals to make some changes, but we really need to set them up in an environment that allows those changes to happen. Okay. Cynthia, you want it back to you?
Sure.
Awesome.
Thank you. So we wanted to have a conversation of what are the benefits of a PSE approach in your community. And this is based on what we just shared and defined. I'm gonna go back. Yeah, these are sort of the ways that PSE can change and improvements in both policy systems and environmental spaces. And we wanted to open it up to ask, what are the benefits and the why you want to do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other and have a conversation. What are the benefits of a PSE approach?
Do we need to raise hands or?
Sure, you can go ahead and then.
Okay. Well, I think one benefit is, just listening to the slide presentation, taking a PSE approach means you're thinking in the long term and, past the single moment, but what's the long term and more or less permanent change that we're aiming for?
Yeah, I was going to say sustainable change, making
Yeah.
it more sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
More.
Go first, Sue.
So I'm curious as to why opening and running a community garden is a programs approach, not a PSE.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
You want to go for it?
Yeah,
Alex?
so that's a great question. So it's not considered PSE because it's not considered like a long-term change. If you open a community garden, it could be more dependent on, all right, this space is available right now, but maybe they're going to sell that space off for a building in the future. Maybe there isn't designated funding for it. So it's about changing, like, in the town policy, that there will always be space for community gardens, or there will always be some funding, that there's like a written document about how the community garden plots are assigned, or things like that. So making it more long-term and permanent.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yupang.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that because, Stu, I really appreciate that question, and it sort of made me think about, you know, we're on the Fort River Community Garden Circle, and I can see that one way to take that kind of program intervention, which is just like a single community garden set up in this specific neighborhood, you know, the circle is connected to another circle that's thinking about how can we make it a policy that every apartment building, for example, designates, you know, so much space for the residents to garden in. That would be like a policy level, you know, thing.
That's awesome. Awesome example. Yeah.
Great. Any other thoughts of the benefits of PSE approach? Or just questions about? Yeah, Kia?
Yeah, so I really like the big picture thinking, you know, of being prepared ahead of time. I'm just wondering about time, you know, like if something needs to happen quicker than you have time to, you know, get a city ordinance passed, like who knows, that could take 2 years, you know, like, is there a way to approach it with this, in this way, bigger picture thinking, but maybe a little quicker in some cases?
It's a great question. And I will say that PSE change does take longer, right? You know, to actually get a city ordinance passed, that can take a long time. And this is where it's important to recognize, like, taking a programs approach isn't a bad thing. So when you need to do things on a quicker timeline, I would suggest doing things that generate that interest, that generate the like knowledge or sparks the conversation. So, you know, if we go back to like the community garden example, awesome. If there's a space right now and people are interested, make it, right? Like get that community garden going. And then you can backtrack to doing that PSE change, being like, look how successful this has been. Let's make this an actual policy. Let's make this an ordinance, you know, to have urban agriculture in our city or town. So sometimes you can still use that programs approach to go into that PSE change. We just don't want to stop at the programs approach. And this has been pretty successful in other places, like, you know, they started farmers markets, for example, which is awesome. And then they've used that to be like, all right, let's make a city ordinance or something about accepting SNAP benefits or other things at these farmers markets, or that there's actual funding for it kind of forever in our town budget to make sure that they happen. And for other folks and other places, like, it's not just the farmers market, but like whatever leftover food from there, maybe sometimes the town will buy and like that'll go to the food pantry, things like that are like interesting examples of what can be done.
Go for it, Joanny.
I love the mobile markets.
Yo digo un ejemplo de Ave Market de Hammers.
I'm talking about the example of the Amherst Mobile Market. Something else that it's perhaps related that I'm still concerned about is that those apartment complexes don't have recreative areas for children. there are small children there, and they don't have an area where they can enjoy the
Mhm.
space, or for the elders. There is no space for people to sit down under a tree and see their children play. And that is something necessary for children developments. Many apartment complexes don't have it, and that is something very important. In Amherst, for example, the one that was created is very good because the whole community was expecting it, but and not everybody has access to it. It would be good for the whole community to have a free space for their children to play and for the elderly.
Absolutely. And so this is another example
Abs-
of, oh, go ahead.
No, que yo digo que aquí hay mucho terreno.
What I say is there's lots of space here, and something bigger could be done for more people.
Yeah.
The community had talked about a long time ago that they will get space to create a park for everybody to have a space, for the community to have a space and have the possibility of strolling and having entertainment. That was 3 years ago, and nothing has happened. And I always listen that there's always free space and the money, but they don't just begin the process, and the community doesn't have anything to be to have a recreational space for them.
Yeah, that is definitely an issue, and that's a good example of trying to make some PSE change and making that town ordinance law, whatever it is, that when they build apartment buildings, that they have to build or have open space or have like a playground with it that they maintain, right? So having that language in there makes it happen, because as you just said, sometimes they're like, yeah, we should think about that, or we should do that, but there's no law, there's no concrete, like, yep, you have to do this. And so that's what we're looking for with that PSE change, is actually changing some of the policies to make sure that this happens.
Thank you all for these great examples. Sue, yeah.
Yes, I have to admit to being a little concerned, because I believe that government top down hasn't worked well, doesn't work well. And so if you're trying to, say in West Hampton, we try and get an ordinance to create long-term for this community garden, it actually takes it away from the responsibility of the community and individuals. And I much prefer the idea of bottom up and community members actually being responsible. So I don't want my local government select board to say, this is what you will do. I actually want us to do it ourselves.
And that can be absolutely fine, right? So depending on what change you're trying to make, it can still be the community members who do it. But, you know, sometimes community gardens get into the situation where they've only rented the space for a couple of years, and after that, whoever the landlord or landowner is, like, they decide, nope, I don't want to rent it to you anymore. I want to sell this land, make a profit, and they're going to build an apartment building there. And so what we want to change, or what we want the government to come in and be like, nope, you will always have a space for community garden, but it's still up to you as the community members, right? About actually running. So it just depends on how it's like done, how it's worded, right? And thinking it that way.
So is that like in terms of how the policy is written
It's
up?
written, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
I-
yeah.
I just wanted to add an example in West Hampton. So the actual town itself has the right to farm community, and this is a bylaw. This is within the community that is telling you, you have the right to farm. So when we talk about policy, think about this right to farm policy or law as the one that you want to have in your town or your community, so that community members in can grow food and kind of have that freedom. Not every town or city has that. So some of the policy changes are to potentially include a right to farm policy or bylaw within their municipal government.
Okay.
And it looks a little bit different, obviously, in urban settings, right? Because they have more complexities in there. So and I hear you, because I feel like the top-down approach can be challenging, right? Depending on the context and community. And you need in some way you need both. And it's also trying to find a happy medium, which is usually very challenging at the same time. And I think being able to know that, in some communities already have it or are working towards that. So then residents can have that freedom of whether to grow food or whether to have, safer streets or whether to have, other physical approaches there. So I hear you and feel it. And I think part of the work is knowing that it is complex and it is challenging, and you need both allies within town government, because unfortunately they do still have power and could change things, right, and how it affects the well-being of residents. And you also need the residents that are, advocating and saying, this is our community, this is how we want it to be. So with PSC, you're trying to find ways to include those voices, make space for that, and also make a space for municipal leaders to hear those voices and really make the changes internally to benefit all residents. Is that helpful at all with the big context?
It's certainly something to think about. I mean, the land is from the schools. Schools, they're not going to take that away. A new principal might, it's possible. We went to the select board and said, this is what we're doing. Hope you like it. So said, but this is what we plan. They couldn't really say anything about it, or they didn't say anything about it. Yeah, so and we are a right to farm. So yeah, it's it'll be interesting when we open it up from the organic school garden to the rest of the community. But we do have a lot of land at both schools that they have allocated to us. So yes, I guess they could take it away, but not if they see it successful.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And again, it's situational, right? So you're in the awesome position of the school allocating space for this, but that's not true for every community.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Welcome. Thank you for sharing that example in different ways of how it can look. And it looks differently in every community, the PSC approach. I'm just gonna share the screen again. And I feel like maybe today we'll focus more on like some food related changes due to the great work that you're all doing around that. But we sort of briefly, again, talked about the benefits, and there's more than, this is really a good question to also have within yourself whenever you're doing the work, or like, what are the benefits? And this is really also important of ways to communicate it to community to really bring folks together. So also think of this question as another tool for your toolbox when it comes to the work being done. Want to talk a little bit about upstream? Pass it back to you, Allison.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about these PSC changes, we're really talking about making what we call upstream changes. Now, most of public health work, and food policy is definitely in public health work, has historically focused on what we call downstream approaches. So downstream is really thinking about, like, once something has already happened, we're trying to fix the problem, right? We're trying to remedy it, versus going upstream and trying to prevent the problem from occurring in the first place. So if we look at the next slide, we kind of have some, Yeah, we can go to this one. We have some examples of the upstream versus downstream. So when we look at this, on the left side of your screen, it says social inequities and this institutional power. And that's what we consider upstream approaches. We're looking at some of these things. And then disease and injury and mortality are downstream, right? So the example of this is always like, you have someone floating down the river, they need to be rescued. You're pulling people out at the bottom. Why aren't we going to the top and preventing people from getting into that situation, right? The ambulance is coming, that's downstream. We still need that. And we want to move upstream and do the work there as well. So if we're looking at this and we're thinking about PSE change, so if we think, for example, about those laws, those regulations in your towns, for example, maybe we're going for like an open space one, right? Johanny was talking about, we want open spaces in our apartment complexes. We want places for our children to play, our seniors to walk, safe spaces. So if we're trying to make a policy that changes the physical environment, it says you must provide these open spaces, or these open spaces must continue to be green spaces versus building in them. Then we're trying to prevent, again, some of those risk behaviors, right? By increasing those open spaces, hopefully we're increasing our physical activity, therefore decreasing any diseases or injury that could be due to low physical activity and decreasing mortality rates due to that. Does this kind of chain make sense to folks? Any questions
about all the clicking? I also wanted to mention, sometimes a lot of the work is done, going upstream in this way of like people have chronic disease or injuries, and what leads to that is low physical activity. And then your doctor, like my doctor's like, oh, have physical activity, do
more exercise,
do more exercise, and but then you realize there's more context to it. Is again, a lot part of that is living conditions. So is it the physical environment? Is it safe for people to have more physical activity? What's the social environment? Do people feel safe, or is it fun? And all of these play a role on people's health. So just showing an example of like how is mentioned, from the right to really where upstream is where a lot of that plays a big role in why people may have, some risk behaviors, some disease and injury and all of that, and really trying to shift the way that we think about how people's health, and not so much as individualized piece, which is part of it, but we also know that there's more unseen and known there. And I think the tree that I think all of you have known and done kind of speaks to that piece of like the root causes of the health there. But before we go into deeper level, I wanted to open it up and see if there were any questions.
or thoughts, comments?
Yes.
Even examples. Oh, go ahead.
That just says, it's just interesting. I'm a trained certified functional nutrition counselor, and I use this exact diagram.
Oh, do you?
Nutrition, the roots are your genes, your digestion, and inflammation on the individual level.
That's so cool.
That also creates all these symptoms, which are all the diseases that are as a result of it. So it's interesting that this is like a more cultural, I guess, systemic kind of, you're saying community systems, all that, but it's just interesting because I'm really trying to help people in the individual, but I do also understand that, like the point you made about if you can't get out and exercise, movement is so important. But if you can't get out and exercise in your community, you don't have a place to go bring your children to play, or even an elder person, like the point that Johanny made, I feel like the town planning should have that built into the system policies for these developers. It's just like, why isn't that the case if we're social beings, it's like, so it's just, I don't know, it's just very interesting. So I just wanted to share that.
No, that's great. That's an interesting example. And, if we go back, a lot of communities were built with the express purpose of driving your car around. Like that was the thing, right? So there were a lot of planned communities without sidewalks because that was the thing. That was the future, was driving your car. And yes, I drive my car and I would like to be able to walk outside to something, right? Even if I'm just going for a walk around the block or I'm trying to go to like the grocery store, but like it has to be safe.
Right.
Right? You have to have sidewalks. You need to have crosswalks or lights to help you out there. And they need to be accessible. So they need to have curb cutouts, right? They need to have all these things in order for everyone to be able to be outside.
Right, everyone, not just car
Everyone.
owners, right?
Not just car owners. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sue, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, it's me again. I apologize.
No,
Oh,
you're good.
the thing for me that's missing in this diagram is food. Yes, you talk about diet, but one of the big, huge issues in this country is the lack of safe, affordable, clean, organic food for everybody.
Yeah.
And that causes so much illness and so much. Why isn't it on there? Or is it somewhere else? Is it somewhere else?
So it could be maybe under the built environment, right? Because built environment is where I guess like that piece you can put it there.
Okay.
And this is not an exhaustive list in any way.
It's just for me, it's just such a
that's a huge
part
one.
of it.
Yeah.
I think it kind of needs a
totally
lot of its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can have a whole tree just on food and go into details. And I think that will be a really fun visual to have, actually, I would say. And I agree. Because also with food, it's like not only the built environment, you have to also think about like employment. Is there enough funding for that, for people to get employed to then grow the food? And the cost of that, it's like all of this ties in all together. So it'll be really interesting to do together.
And they could be included down in the roots there and like the distribution of resources and the structural barriers. If you think about like where is food grown and then how is it transported to other areas or not, and why do they go to specific places and not others?
Can I interrupt briefly?
Of course.
Just want to switch the interpretation to our second interpreter.
Absolutely.
So 1 second. Hi, Edith.
Hi, how are you? This is Edith.
Hi, I'm doing good. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks to you. So yeah, let me know when I can switch to the Spanish channel so I can talk on the Spanish channel, please.
I just switched it over, so let us know if you're ready. Thank you, Mariana. Okay, we're all good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions or thoughts on upstream versus downstream?
Yeah, I have my hand up.
Yeah.
This is Jupong. I don't know if the thought is about upstream versus downstream, but so many thoughts about this diagram and what Sue just said, which is, I understand that this diagram is made, with a focus on health, so you see the word health a lot, but it is really striking that we could talk about health without, and maybe I should say instead of we, that whoever, created this diagram was and it's not a single person, it's a collective. So it's a group of people that are talking about health without any mention of food. I mean, of course, the idea of food and everything that's related to food, the questions that I think we are grappling a lot with in the Hampshire Food Policy Council they're all kind of embedded in everything in this diagram, but you know, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, so I'm like, it's really interesting to me to ask that question of why is the word food or the, you know, idea of food not included in this diagram about health, when food is absolutely central to, no matter how our ideas, definitions of health, you know, how they might differ, we all have to eat in order to even be alive. So food is really central.
Yeah, and you're right, and it isn't explicitly in there. Diet is in there. I will also mention that this particular tree comes from a more looking at racism example in terms of health. And that being said, yes, we still all need food, and you know, there's the question of what food is available in different neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, thank you all for that. Yeah, and again, this is really helpful to know, and thinking through how to create a tree just on food itself and diving in deeper. That'll be a fun activity. Kristen, we can follow up more and talk about it. Not trying to add more work to you, but something to think through. We can definitely help with that piece too. I'm gonna move us along. And actually gonna pass it to Kristen to talk a little bit more about some PSC strategies that you're all doing at Healthy Hampshire. I'm happy to stop sharing my screen so we can see you.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, we thought it would be helpful to connect this conversation back to some of the work that you all are probably familiar with. Healthy Hampshire has been doing policy systems and environmental change work for more than 10 years now. And so a couple of examples are things that we have already been referencing and talking about. And I think it is helpful to highlight that what we talked about in the beginning, policy systems and environmental change is often building over time, especially when it's community-based, like the work that we do. So for instance, working in Amherst, we had, you know, worked on a community food assessment. And I think a lot of people have heard the story that a couple particular recommendations came out of that assessment. It was a community engaged process. Some of you were involved. I know Yohani was involved. And, you know, one of the things that came out of that assessment was to develop a food policy council. So thinking about the food policy council as a strategy for creating a structure, a platform through which community members can impact the food system. So it's a systems change because we're creating a new structure that helps people to change the food system. So another thing that came out of that assessment in Amherst was the Amherst Mobile Market, which is, it is kind of a program, and it's a good example of how, you know, sort of building toward bigger policy systems and environmental change. The Amherst Mobile Market's now been going on for 3 years, and now, well, actually, we're going into our 4th season, and now we're working on creating a food resolution in the town of Amherst that would actually something like the right to farm community, something that would say Amherst is committed to food justice and committed to supporting programs and initiatives like the Amherst Mobile Market. And we've had some small wins along the way. We got an earmark in the state budget. So that's a change that is systemic, to have funding built into the state budget to fund this program. It might not always be there, state budgets change, but it's moving in that direction of having more sustainable funding that we can rely on, so that the market isn't fundraising every single year. I mean, we still are fundraising, but not as much. We don't have to start from scratch every single year. So those are a few things that we've worked on in the food planning realm. Some of the community garden work also, and particularly working with the housing authorities to take ownership over the gardens in community gardens in Northampton, to help the housing authorities take ownership of the gardens as a way of building that long-term ownership at the community town level or city level, to not say Healthy Hampshire is just going to come in and do garden work and help community members get gardens started, but then we ran out of funding and we can't fund the garden anymore. The goal was to get the housing authorities to build some buy-in so that when Healthy Hampshire's funding runs out, the town or the city is able to step in and provide funding or partner with other organizations to provide funding to make sure those gardens are still running. So some of it is really also, and I know this is up in the Food Policy Council right now, understanding the way that funding works, how the money that makes these programs and these initiatives happen. Part of it is building like more secure systems for knowing that that money is going to be there, that the resource is going to be there, the land is going to be there, that we don't have to go back every year and fight for that, but it's written in to a policy or an ordinance or something that is more, has more weight to it, that says this is going to happen no matter what. Like the town or someone's committed to making sure this happens. One more example I'll give that is not food related, but I think it's a good example. A couple of years ago, we worked on a project in Amherst that was actually, it was in Belchertown, that the town of Belchertown had a new piece of land that they were putting into conservation. They had acquired it and they were interested in engaging people with disabilities and BIPOC people in the conversation around what that piece of land would look like and what would be on it. So Healthy Hampshire worked on, creating a community engagement process where we invited people and we really focused on, we partnered with Stavros, which is a organization that works with people with disabilities. And we got people out to the site and we did some walking around and mapping and talking about what would make this site really, what do you want to see here? Do you want to see a playground? Do you want to see a walking path? Do you want to see signage, a parking lot? Like there was nothing there at all. So, that's an example of how a town can work with community members to engage people in like developing a long-term asset in the community. This is a space that's going to be in the community for a long time, a piece of conservation land. What that space looks like, how accessible it is, and who it serves is all things that we can impact if we're engaged and part of that conversation. So I know what came out of that project in Belchertown. There was only like $15,000, I think, that at that time in the project, but I know they put parking, which was just basic, like to be able to access the site, including accessible parking and a gravel path that led out to the site, and then signage that was bilingual, Spanish, English, sort of showing like this is a conservation area, it's open to the public and can be used. Even just that small thing, it's like people probably wouldn't know that that's a space that's available to them that they could use without signage being there to invite people in. So those are a few examples of things we've done recently.
Thank you,
Kristen,
Kristen.
can I just ask, did you did the housing authority, you've asked them to do this, or where's it at with them?
So yeah, the housing authorities do have ownership over the gardens now, and it's complicated, as Kia and others could speak to. It's not, there are downsides, kind of like Sue was talking about, like that also means that they have more control over the gardens, and there's figuring out the balance of power between community members and the housing authorities is a challenge ongoing, but the gardens are there and they're supported every year to exist and to have that space allocated. I don't know if you have any other comments on that, Kia. I mean, this was before my time at Healthy Hampshire too.
Yeah, so Healthy Hampshire and the United Way in Cooley Dickinson originally built the community garden at Hampshire Heights. And I think at Florence Heights too, but I'm not sure. But anyway, here at Hampshire Heights, I can talk about because we've recently switched over to having Grow Food Northampton be our fiscal sponsor. So we raise money for Grow Food, like we did that with the Food Policy Council specifically for the gardens. You know, Grow Food Northampton also really supports the community gardens with, you know, a lot of physical labor. They support, so they help us garden every year with, they provide us seedlings for free. You know, all the garden activities for the families, all the events we have are all Grow Food Northampton sponsored. So so what's happening right now is because the housing authority doesn't really like to talk to us residents, all that communication happens through Grow Food Northampton. So they're kind of like the go-between between us and them. And they kind of keep the peace between the residents who are constantly pissed off at them and making sure that we maintain our gardens. So yeah, I think the frustrating thing for me is that they treat us like we're not human and that we have no brains and we can't talk about these things because we don't know anything. So that's why we need them to talk to them. For us, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's the way it is now. Nobody likes it that way, but it's what we have. And as long as we're allowed to garden, I think little by little, as the housing authority sees how devoted everybody is to their little garden plots, you know what I mean? I think year by year, it's going to get easier and easier. This is the second year that Grow Food has really helped us maintain the garden. So, and this year seems better. So we'll see how next year goes.
Thank you all for sharing. Any other questions or thoughts? No?
Yo quería preguntarle a Kristen sobre eso. Se fue de vegetal, ¿verdad?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask Kristen about this. Is this like, it's like a really big place?
In Vegetal.
Oh, was this in Bedgetown?
It was, yeah.
What you
And
mentioned?
You came to that event, Johanny, I'm pretty sure.
Sí,
Yes. Yes. We made like we just had a bunch of ideas and we made some like drawings. You know, I'm still waiting for that pergola that they were gonna put in there.
I know, the gazebo was a big idea that everyone loved.
Sí. Sí, porque
Have you
es
been
un
back,
lugar muy
Johanny?
grande.
Yes, because it's like a really big piece of land there.
Sí, ese lugar es muy, muy grande. O sea, tiene
Yes,
mucho.
that place is like really big. There's so many, so many things can be done there. And I remember there was like that big gazebo. It would be really nice because everyone that's an artist or like it's a musician, you know, like cultural things, they could like put them in there for all that community around there. And it was like kind of like an important focus point for everyone.
Yes, I don't think they have put the gazebo in yet, but at least they got the parking and the signage started.
Sí, ya tiene el parqueo.
Yes, at least we have the parking there.
All the small wins, we gotta celebrate them. Thank you, Kristen, for sharing, and I know there'll be more to come. We wanted to give you, timely example to highlight those. We did want to share an example that we came across. There we go, the clip goes, and I'll pass it to Allison on that.
So this is a big paragraph, but I'm going to summarize it. So this is talking about school districts who want to address the rising obesity crisis among their student populations. And to do that, they implemented PSE changes, and they did it in each letter there. So they have a policy change, a systems change, and an environmental change. It's not always necessary to have all three in one thing, but this is an example of all three. And so what happened here is this program decided to increase the purchase of their fresh and locally grown produce to use in school lunches, and that was a policy change. Then they came together with farmers and health stakeholders to really work together to put it into the school lunch. So that's a systems change. And with access to those healthy food options, helping students actually learn about healthy eating, and hopefully improving their eating habits, which is considered an environmental change. So this is an example again of all three there. And one of the questions that we have for you all is like, if this is something that happens, one of the important things when we have PSE change is thinking about how we communicate that PSE change, right? Who do we need to communicate it to? How do we communicate it in order to make it, again, this long-term change? And so I thought we could use this example and really talk about, you know, how would you communicate this work? If this is like something that you all were doing, and I know you're working in food policy, but maybe not exactly this one, but how would you communicate this out to folks? Or we could start with, who would you communicate this out to?
Pregunta es, ¿a quién se lo diría para que sea posible?
I guess
o-
in this case, I guess, are you asking like who is asked, who we tell this to so that to make it possible, or who do we tell this to, like those that are going to be benefit by this change?
It could be either of them, right? So when you're doing PSE change, you really do need to communicate it ahead of time to those who are going to help you make it possible. And then once you've started making these changes, you want to keep communicating it so that it continues to be possible and you have that buy-in, right? So it's like, who benefits then? You need that buy-in.
Bueno, yo diría que
I
en
guess
primer lugar,
I would say first is like where money comes from, the government, like this, the state. And then secondly, maybe organizations that work with these type of policies, like food policies, to help the community, to be able to see and then see who's the stakeholder in the community to be able to make this. So, and then everyone that's going to be benefited, like, children and parents of having good health. So like, when we know as parents that the kids have a good health, or like a good food, that's good. And then as a community, it's good to just like share around everyone in the community so that they know, when they make a decision, for like policies, because sometimes, the voice of the community is good because then that kind of like transparency and like goes all the way up to like the government.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
I was just wondering, nutrition services, is that what schools have? Like I didn't really even know they had such like nutrition services, because I guess speaking to them, then also speaking to the public health department would probably be the health stakeholders, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it depends on the school.
With the community, the parents, the community members also be the stakeholders, right? I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. Depends what they're called in different school districts, if it's actually called nutrition services or not. But yes, they do, right? Like there is a group behind that is supposed to make sure all the school meals have nutritional value. We can go back and forth about that if they actually do. But this is a real example. And Cynthia, it was Ben who was talking about this in Springfield, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to share? Do you remember enough to share that?
Yeah. So similar work was done in Springfield in talking about PSE change. It took them about 10 years to actually make the policy happen in different systems and environmental changes process. And a lot of it, actually, that I was just thinking about it too, as you all speaking, that is not really mentioned here, but something to keep in mind. You're dealing with so many different groups, individuals, and really building both relationship and trust is key for making change. Like you are all doing, your whole work in Food Policy Council. So it took them, in Springfield specifically, a couple of years to get Sodexo, who was the food service provider, to actually build the trust within advocates in the community to then make the change. And that took over 3 years, specifically just on that, of being able to be open to have even deeper conversations. So it speaks to the long-term piece that it takes time And part of that time includes like building the relationships, building the trust, and being able to work together. And when it comes to conflict, and really like making time and space for that. And as humans, we're complex and other things happen there. So I think that added to it, but they were able to have Sodexo purchase from local food, from local farmers. And then they realized that now Sodexo is shipping from Rhode Island to process the food and then bringing it back to Springfield. So they noticed, okay, we're still actually not keeping it local and central. So eventually they ended up getting funding to build a production. I don't think I'm saying it correctly, and then I apologize. They pretty much recently built food processing centers specifically for school food, not only in Springfield, but for the region. So it also impacts even greater area. So now Sodexo, buys local food from farmers that are near the area and also process it in Springfield that goes to that school. And some
Thanks,
of
Kristen.
in
So
the
the
area.
Culinary and Nutrition Center,
Yeah,
which
there
sounds
we
way
go.
better than food processing
Very,
center.
yeah, I completely butchered their name, but it's a sort of thinking of that end, like you can start one policy and realize that you still have to tweak it.
Yeah.
Depending on that.
But that was a huge win, right? So they had to work with the food vendors. That took a lot of time, brought in local farmers, and then they had to build a whole new center because they only had warming kitchens in their schools. They didn't have the facilities to actually cook anything there. So they had to fundraise and do that and make that change. So that's a huge example of PSE change there.
Yeah, and it included not only Sodexo was a really big company, but the city actually was able to funding and continues to really support that process. So knowing that it's very different in context-wise, but it also speaks to how PSE looks. Then you can start with one policy and then looking at systems change that you might have to do to continue to really benefit students specifically in this context, in this example. So yeah, any questions or thoughts?
There's a few comments in the chat. So like connecting with news outlets and social media in order for communication, absolutely. Perhaps helpful to create a parents and professional council to help evaluators supervise that program implementation. Absolutely, right? In all of our PSE change, we still want to make sure that the people who are impacted the most have the biggest voice, right? So like that is something that is very core to us. So if we're talking about this, like get families on this council, get students on this council, like designate spots for students who are in the schools and maybe alumni too, right? So thinking about that, and like if you're creating that sort of council, making sure that that's in the like advisory board guidelines.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Other comments, questions? All of the questions down the side of this slide, so like what data is needed, what partnerships might be helpful, how do you engage the community, how do you measure success? These are all questions that you need to think about when doing PSE change, right? And so, there's a specific kind of thought process and order, but also they're going to come up all the time. So, one of the things that you need to think about is like, who are your champions in this work? Who are your key stakeholders, right? So how do you engage them and then bring it out to the rest of the community as well? Yes, you have your hand up. Someone has their hand up. I see a little thing.
Yeah, that's me,
Okay,
Chupong.
excellent.
Yeah, I was just the last little bit, especially Cynthia's example, the story of the food company. Was it Sodexo?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I've had some experience with. And so that made me think about, we're talking about, when we talk about systems change, it can sometimes feel like there's such a huge distance between, sort of individuals and communities and then towns and then, you know, to like these really big. So even if we just talk about making change on the town level versus the state level versus the federal level, you know, it's just so that when you mentioned Sodexo, then that adds the layer of corporations. And so, yeah, I just wanted to sort of put that in the discussion, you know, the messiness of how to make local change when you're, in some ways, many communities feel at the mercy of, you know, these big food corporations or non-food, you know, like soda drink companies that, you know, are sort of in the food category, but they're really, that's not food. Anyway, okay.
Yes.
Off my soapbox.
No, that's
real.
a great point.
And I think you brought the key term is messiness and complexity, and being able to still find the will within yourselves and in your groups and the why, like really going back to why you're really doing this, because it gets to the point of doing PSC work that you'll find roadblocks, a lot of walls, frustration, and being able to take care of yourself, right? Because you have to take care of yourself in order to do this work. And I really like this saying that one of my college professors said, you know, self-care is group care. Like if you are not taking care of yourself, you know, and you're trying to do group work, you know, it's not going to help. So being able to take care of yourself, to really go back and saying why am I doing this again, and having that motivate you. And that includes really building community and trust within people that are doing the work, to go there. So I went on a tangent, so I apologize, but wanted to see if there were any other thoughts, and wanted to just check on the time to be mindful. Okay.
Yeah, you have your hand raised. Yeah, go ahead. I think you're still muted. There you go.
You know, I think about messaging a ton connected to policy, because in order for, so say we have this great project, we do this wonderful thing, and we'd like it to be codified somehow so that it's protected for the future. In order for our policy to get broad support for politicians to vote for it or use it or to implement it, however that works, the messaging has to be really spot on. And I noticed that there's like, there's a segment of the population in Massachusetts who thinks that poor people are lazy and stupid and that they don't deserve to eat right, and they don't want to use their tax dollars to supplement their food, you know, stuff.
Yeah.
And so, but this is really wrong. I mean, it's not true. The way they think about it is just not true. So I think a lot about messaging and a lot about how to communicate what we do. And sometimes I think that maybe we have to include them in that conversation in the way that this is how all people will benefit, not just poor people or not just, you know, people you don't like, but you guys too will benefit from these policies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think messaging is huge if there's going to be any progress. And if anything needs to be like codified so that something isn't like around for like 2 years because we have funding and then it goes away because we don't. You know what I mean? Like it's to me, it's systemic, it's messaging, it's politics being all crazy. It's, you know, it's way bigger than I can fix, but I think about it every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I wanted to add, I think you really brought us to a good point of messaging. And I think our next question is, well, one of it is evaluating there, but we'll pass that on. I just want to bring us back of like, how do you communicate?
Yeah, so that's
changes.
Yeah.
And you really brought it point the messaging, but also the different audiences. So I wanted to bring us back in thinking through an example of PSC changes that Healthy Hampshire is doing with the town of Amherst, trying to do this, you know, ordinance of being able to make it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, to make it a sort of like it's a food justice area. I'm probably not saying it correctly, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, that we don't have the wording nailed down yet, but essentially that Amherst would commit to promoting food justice.
There we go. So thinking of that as a PSC change that is on the works, how do you communicate that in your community? With all the wisdom that was shared here, just now, it's important to also ask ourselves that how to communicate it and knowing that there are different audiences, different ways you do it. So wanted to stop communicating myself and then open it up for folks to do that.
Well, one thing that we are doing is working with a town councilor to really kind of get her on board to really believe in this ordinance and to help design it so that she can go back to the rest of town council and kind of talk about why this is important. So local legislators, and we have been doing that because, or sort of in part, through this town councilor's participation in the Amherst Mobile Market Planning Committee. So like that link also from like how you build from program to policy or systems change. We've had a town councilor involved in the program that we're working on, and now we are involving her in this next level of work around, this ordinance or resolution.
Bring up too, when I talk to people about how you communicate really anything or do messaging, you need to think about your supporters as well as your opponents, right? So when you come up with that messaging, you need to talk to both of them, right? And a lot of people think about, well, I'm just going to say this so that I can, whoever backs this, they'll vote for me. And I'm like, yeah, and you need to talk to those who don't understand it and or don't want it, and like bring it up. And I will say that, it is our, I don't know, the way our brains work mostly, that the negative things or the things that will impact me stick with me. All I need is a one-liner like, nope, that's not good for me. And that's it, right? I haven't thought about any of the other impacts. And we don't really have a society that thinks of the collective versus we think of the individual. And that's another change that, I'm working towards, but it's slow, right? It's very slow going. But, this is, again, something to think about in our messaging when we are thinking about and talking about PSE changes that we're trying to do on that community level. So if there aren't other questions or comments, but if there are, please speak up or put them in the chat. We do hope that you're, leaving with some ideas of what PSE change is, thinking about what is needed, knowing that yes, PSE change can be a longer term process, but there are a lot of steps along the way to celebrate, right? And thinking about those and using those as talking points and communication strategies as well, right? So, if you're trying to get this ordinance passed, but you're holding some programs approaches first, like really celebrating that, like we held this, right? We got this farmers market there. We have this mobile market, and really talking about those and celebrating those to use those to get to that bigger PSE change. And Kristen just put in the chat that May 11th is the next one, and I will be back to talk about facilitation skills with my coworker Lauren. So excited to be back and talk to you all about that as well.
And then we'll have 2 more trainings on the 18th and the 25th about sociocracy related, generating proposals and sociocracy in the context of social justice. So same time, 4:30 to 6, same link. Hope we'll see everybody back next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead,
okay.
Mom.
I guess I know I was feeling like, okay, we're trying to wrap up, but
no,
I feel like the last few things that were said, Allison, a bunch of what you said just raised a whole bunch of, it'll definitely need to be part 2 of this discussion, but I just wanted to highlight what I heard you talking about was the ways that there are really different cultures around communication,
Yes.
and even think how we think about, you know, individuals versus community. And I use versus intentionally because I think that in, you know, kind of dominant mainstream white America, it's all about the individual, and as if an individual can be separate from the collective. So I just wanted to put that in the room because, you know, not that we're all in community the same way at all, but that I think there's, well, yeah, maybe that's my point, is that, you know, the backgrounds we come from, what we think about, you know, when we think about community, like that is all very related to this whole piece about communication that we,
Absolutely.
you know, that we just raised.
Absolutely.
And, you know, and I just want to give a shout out to Rosana Salazar for, you know, really making sure that we prioritize language access. You know, if we're talking about communication, we can't really be doing the work of opening up how we communicate unless we kind of start from the place of understanding that we are a multilingual people. We speak many different languages.
Mhm.
And I say that as someone who's really almost lost my connection with my mother tongue, but I was not born speaking English.
Yep.
I was born into a family that spoke Hokkien. And the fact that I almost cannot speak Hokkien anymore, that is the result of living in an English dominant USA. So I appreciate very much this piece about communication. And as you can tell, I have a lot more to say about it, but I will stop there.
Oh, thank you for bringing that in. And we could do a whole other several workshops and discussions about that, right? Like, and it affects everything. It affects everything.
Yeah, we appreciate it, and I think we're open, you know, as HRA, as TA providers, to Kristen and Healthy Hampshire to continue the conversation on and further. So we're very excited to be in this space with you all, build community, but also really be able to help facilitate conversations to deepen the work. So it's an honor to be here, and we really appreciate your commitment into this incredible, challenging, messy, exciting work that is happening in Hampshire County. So we appreciate you. We wish you the best. Enjoy your evening.
Can I ask one question?
Of
Allison?
course.
The
Please.
facilitation skills, is this facilitation skills for talking? I mean, in the line of what we're talking about now, like,
It's facilitation in terms of like running groups, like when you're like you know, running meetings or like what Cynthia and I are doing right now, sort of thing.
oh, to do like community organizing, I guess, in a sense too.
Yeah.
If you were to, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome.
So yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Thanks, left.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good night.
All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right.